consecutive year, entrepreneurs from the USB Small Business Academy will display their trade and the enterprise, while guests of the business school are treated to delicacies from the continent, and in my language we call this amakademia. Now, I must tell you something. It is of course rude in my Bondo culture for you not to eat everything that the host presents. So ladies and gentlemen, please do indulge. And don't worry about bunting or not bunting, we'll deal with it after the weekend. And now let me introduce our guest speaker. I'll introduce to you Abel Sithole. He's a senior research fellow at the Institute for Futures Research here at the University of Stellenbosch. Before joining the IFR, he was with Metropolitan in various executive positions as executive director for a few years, 7 years, responsible for employee benefits and responsible for asset management. Now, I'm hesitating as I'm speaking because in my culture, it's also rude to introduce someone while they're alive, because it's seen as an omen that you are predicting their death.
Yeah, so please don't go.
It's also uncomfortable. So I'm thinking now, shall I continue or not?
No.
But I suppose the rest you can Google. All I can say is they have a lot of experience in the fields of asset management, employee benefits, in the financial services sector. He's also been involved with the Financial Services Board. He's a certified financial planner. He has an MPhil in Future Studies, an MBA. And he started as a teacher. We chatted a bit about that, and I see this circle going on. Started as a teacher, then went into business, and now in a way is back into teaching. So, ladies and gentlemen, without predicting his death, Abel Sithole.
So in Chivenda, in another language also called Tonga or Shangaan. In this Africa Day, if I go beyond this point, you must make sure that you tell me to go back. If I go beyond this point, you must tell me to stay in my place. Stay in my place with that accent. It is a beautiful day, and I'm glad to see you so early in the morning. Now, before I get started with the talk, I want you to do me a favor. I want you, all of you have paper. The paper is not meant for you to do what I'm about to ask you to do, but if you have a pen, and I want you to write it down, there's a good reason why I want you to write it down, is to think about Africa and think about what is your image of Africa. Africa is a very interesting place. For most of us who are African, how many people here are African, by the way? Or no, how many people are not African? Let's ask in the sense. Okay, there's one person who's not African. That's quite interesting. But for most people who are African, we have this incredible attachment to the continent. That is always kind of revealing about our relationship with the continent, the countries that make the continent. My talk, of course, does try to speak to the fact that Africa is not a country, it's actually a very, very big place. A very, very interesting big place. We'll come back to that now. What I want you to do is to write for yourself. Well, because you're writing in that piece of paper, I'll probably end up seeing it anyway because I'll be keen to see it. But it is more for yourself. What is your image of Africa? If I just ask you, take a few seconds, what is your image of Africa? What you're thinking, I'll continue. Now for me, and I hope some of you will come up with this, and it's, because it's a rhetorical question, doesn't really matter. I mean, when you think about Africa, do you think of Charlize Theron and Lupita Nyong'o? Do you think about Chinua Achebe, Gungu Thiong'o, Nadine Gordimer, and Jane Koutia? Okay. When you think about Africa, do you think about ladies with black mambas? Or, okay, yes, you do. That's interesting. When you think about Africa, do you think about Nelson Mandela? Yeah. Do you think about Robert Mugabe? Yeah. Okay. When you think about Africa, do you think about Salva Kiir? Okay. Do you know who he is? Maybe not. He's the president of South Sudan. I can go on, but when you think about Africa, do you think about MTN?
Yes.
Do you think about SAP Miller?
Yeah.
Okay. When you think about Africa, do you think about a Dolores? What is that, you ask? Any engineers in this room?
No.
You should know. What is a Dolores?
It's the barrier that is
The contraption that we use to protect reclaimed land or land in the shore that is subject to being kind of eroded by the ocean. So when you build Hong Kong, the most important thing in the building of Hong Kong is the Dolores. When you build the islands in Dubai, the most important thing in the building of Dubai is the Dolores, because you need to actually structure that. Well, where do you think, where was it invented? When you think about South Africa, about Africa, do you think about a creepy crawling?
Yeah.
And the fact that everywhere there is a pool, there's a contraption that is a copy of a creepy crawling. Now, where was it invented? Okay, so you get it somewhere. When you think about peace, who do you think about? F.W. de Klerk? Do you think about Nelson Mandela? Do you think about Sirleaf Johnson in Liberia? Okay. Now I've kind of given you a sense of the possibilities that Africa has to offer. Now, I want you to now write, and you must write it down, the two Africans, could be the one that I've talked about, but maybe two Africans that are extremely close to you, that you know very, very well. Again, a few minutes, shouldn't take you too long, and maybe in a second. Two, if you write one, I don't mind, but two will be nice. Okay, finished writing. Shall I ask you a few people who they're written about? Anybody wants to volunteer? Maybe that's the way to do it. Any names of interesting people that you've written about? Anybody? Come on, guys, somebody.
Josh Uganda.
Who?
Oh, not good.
Now you caught me. Now you caught me. Now you caught me. He doesn't exist, eh?
About Red Sox Friday,
Yeah?
and they're busy cycling from Cape Town to Durban.
Ah, yes.
To run the conference.
Yes. And I know who you're talking about.
So that's
Yeah, that's somebody you
it's
know.
from my running club, so that's my.
Anybody else want to volunteer? It is a tricky question, but it's a trick question, so I
raise money and they already got the first million together.
Ah, okay. Anybody? Now, here's the question I'm going to ask you. There's only one person in this room who's not an African. Now, how many of you have written your own name? Remember what I asked you? Which two Africans do you know very, very well? How many have written your own name?
I didn't write my own name, it was my children's name.
Ah, at least that's an improvement. That's a very great improvement. I'm impressed that you actually at least did that. But the most amazing thing is that in our conception, in our image of what Africa is, we're not in it. What does that tell you and me about what we think Africa is, if we do think about it at all? All right, now you know that you have a particular image of Africa. Of course, now I'm going to talk more seriously. The top statement is one that you've seen before. Africa is a hopeless continent. All we think about is about disadvantage. We think about poverty, we think about disease, we think about a military coup, Salva Kiir in South Sudan, the current conflict in Central African Republic, the conflict in Nigeria with Boko Haram. And of course, the other flip side, which is now becoming much more popular, is Africa Rising. That will come from the same source, the Economies. It's an Africa of growth, Yes, it is driven by rising commodities, but we say it's driven by other things. For instance, that the private sector, which I presume most of you are coming from, is the one that is driving the growth of the continent and making us even more optimistic, from hopelessness to optimism about Africa. Except we're not in it. Except for that gentleman there. Then, of course, there's a fact that when we think about it, as all those things, military coups, dictatorship, the truth benefit is Africa in terms of governance is improving. Africa is an interesting place. Africa is the world's second largest and second most populous continent. It's about 1 billion people, as the title of my talk has kind of indicated. It occupies an area which is more than 20% of the total land mass of the earth. And of course, there are 15% of us out there. So there's quite a lot of us. The most interesting thing is that we're actually a very young population. And this room tells the story if you look very, very carefully. There it is. If you don't want to take that and actually try to understand what it means in pictorial terms. And this is true, by the way. It is as diverse as it is big. You can take the whole of China and squeeze it into the continent and still have some spare left. Take the United States, add it into it, squeeze it, still have some spare left. Take the whole of Europe, squeeze it into it, and still have some spare left. It is not only big in the geographical sense, it's that Africa encompasses all that what it is. Whether you're talking about Africa, its relationship with China, Africa's relationship with the United States, or Africa's relationship with Europe, that's who we are. If you don't believe me, just look around the room. Nobody's looking. Okay. Now, when we think about Africa, of course, the way we like to think about it is the Africa which was, in a sense, a product of the scramble for Africa. The fact that pretty much every country in Europe, that's why I told you, by the way, if you look at Africa and you're talking about Africa's relationship to Europe, most of Europe actually is in Africa already, simply because that they're okay, yeah. Whether the Belgians or the Germans or the Spanish, the French, the English or the Italians and the Portuguese. And of course, there are kind of parts of Africa that were never colonized. But when you look at the map of Africa in totality, that's what you see. You see what we call Anglophone Africa, but the countries in Africa that were part of the English tradition, so to speak, and have retained some of that. But all of Africa, that we think of it as Africa's relationship with the rest of the world. Of course, we can talk about other mechanisms. Then, of course, when you think about the whole challenge of governance, of rule, most of the way we think about Africa, when we take the time to conceptualize in it, we also think about the fact that governance has been not so good since independence. And I think this kind of gives you a sense of how bad this situation can be, that you have rulers like Dos Santos in Angola, who has been in a position for more than 30 years. And what goes with that? Because it's not just that he's been in position, it goes with the patronage, the looting of the state that has happened in many parts of the continent. Then, of course, our neighbor Zimbabwe also been in that position for a long time. Now, normally when you ask people for the image of Africa, that's what we kind of comes much more readily. And of course, there's the issues around the diverse ethnicity, the challenges of religion, that you can almost split Africa in half, with the north being predominantly Muslim and the south being predominantly Christian. Of course, it is predominant. It doesn't mean that it looks like that. But the way I like you to look at it is to look at the colors and say how pretty the colors are. Isn't that a better picture of Africa as opposed to having just a green Africa or a purple Africa? The fact that it has a different colors, man, isn't that nice? But why is it when I forget about the colors, I impose religion or ethnicity, suddenly you have problems with the colors? Why is it that we are actually able to relate to the diversity of Africa and think it is beautiful until we superimpose race and religion? Rather than seeing race, religion, and any other distinction that you might think of It's actually quite beautiful, thank you, just like the color of the neck. The number of coups, military dictatorships. Yes, there is a conflict happening in the Central African Republic right now. Yes, there is a conflict in the South Sudan. Yes, there's a conflict in Nigeria. But is there a conflict in South Africa? Well, not the friction of people that happens naturally. Is there one in South Africa? Well, I don't know. What about Namibia? Okay. Give me another country. I would say I won't go up to Libya and those other countries.
Somalia.
What about Somalia? What about, give me a name, Kenya. Give me a name. There are 54 countries, by the way, so you should be able to give me names. But what it tells you, Mozambique, I mean, what it tells you is how little we actually know of Africa. Ourselves. Why? Because we're not in it, although we live in it. So when you think about coups, the most important thing is that what you see is that actually there's been a significant improvement. Yes, you can still think of this conflict that happening everywhere in Africa, but if you just take a step back, you can see I'm raised, I've been around for quite a while. You go back, say, to the 80s and say how many countries in 1988 were in conflict relative to how many countries are in conflict today. What do you think the proportion will be? I can tell you it's a rhetorical question. 80% of countries in Africa were in one form or other of internal conflict in the 80s. Today, how many do you think? Less than 20%. So the improvements in terms of Africa has to do with the fact that while we still think of Africa as a place of strife and military dictatorship, Africa is actually has improved significantly. To improve the economic status of a nation, people should be more flexible. They should produce goods according to the needs of the market that meet the requirements of all kinds of people. Now, why am I saying that? If you think of Africa as diverse as it is, it should be an incredible place to do business in. I mean, just intuitively, you will think about the enormous possibilities that this continent has to offer. When I started out, I started out just raising kind of names that I thought you'd be familiar with. That gives an indication of what possibilities does the continent actually offer, or actually has offered to the world. If I were to ask you the name of a guy called Jonathan Butler, anybody knows Jonathan Butler? Yeah. Well, I'm glad you do know Jonathan Butler. Where does he come from? It comes from Cape Town. It is amazing how we, as a continent, has exported stuff to the world that we don't recognize anymore because we don't think it is ours, or we own it, or actually it is something we are associated with. The continent actually is a place which I think it's offering to us as a people, to us as businesses, opportunities that I think are missed because of our almost, I'll call it being closed to what is available there. What you see is it's kind of an indication of where the continent, and the respective countries, on which I'll come back to later, have performed in the continent over the last couple of years. And what you see is that yes, we come from a low base, but there's been enormous, significant growth in the continent. Some of which we take advantage of, but we don't realize the extent to which it actually is quite beneficial to us. The most important thing is not so much that it has grown, but it's the fact that there are opportunities that are still very, very real. While most of the time we associate those opportunities mostly with resources, it is actually the fact that, given the fact that you have 1 billion people, and in the later slides, so I can talk about it now, is that you have this resident capacity to consume all kinds of things, not just the stuff of simply providing resources to the rest of the world, but we can actually produce a lot more. There is more food being produced in this continent. It is amazing that parts of the continent actually go hungry. And the problem is not so much because it's not there, it's because business people like yourself haven't thought like the guy called John Cecil Rhodes used to think. To build a railway from Cape to Cairo, which is, I think, is one of the ways to deal with the challenge that we find. That's the aspect of agriculture. Issues around the fact that infrastructure in the continent, the railway from Cape to Cairo, is an opportunity that actually needs to still be investigated. I just want to go to this slide quickly. These are Africa's kind of largest cities in terms of population, so to speak. You might worry about whether this is a true picture, but most people, if you ask them, they will say these are the 10 biggest cities. Lagos, with about, say, between 17 million and 21 million, depending on how you look at the picture. And then Cairo coming down at about 9, Kinshasa, then it becomes about 7, South Africa, Joburg, 5 to 7, Mogadishu, the same kind of, and then until you get to Casablanca with about 4 million people. You might say, where is Cape Town? Cape Town is the 11th biggest city with about 3.8 million people, and Durban is the next one with 3.7. Now, this of course is quite interesting, but why do I tell you? Oh, show you this picture. I show you this picture because I want to show you this picture. Sorry, not that one, this one. I didn't do this, but I was tempted to do it. Imagine, do you remember what the cities were? If you have a good memory. Now imagine you wanted to take a trip to all those places. And imagine what would be the best way to do it. Now I was going to give this task to a travel agent and say, draw me an itinerary. I want to visit every single one of those big cities. And how would I do it? It's not doing what I expected to do. Can you see the arrow? Okay. So if you try and draw an itinerary to do all the cities, you probably start in South Africa, and I'm not going by size. If you start by size, you probably would have to start in Nigeria, in Lagos. But I'm just saying, trying logically whatever I do. Being in Cape Town, I'll start from Cape Town. Where would I go first? Next, Dar es Salaam. Where would I go from Dar es Salaam to Kinshasa? To Kinshasa, Brazzaville. From Kinshasa, Brazzaville, I either have the option of going to Mogadishu in Somalia, then cutting across to Khartoum in Sudan, going to Lagos in Nigeria, going to Abidjan in the Ivory Coast, going to Casablanca in Morocco, then what would be the next one? Cairo and Alexandria. That's how I'll have to go. Can't do that. Or the other one, if you want to be clever, you could say, hey, Abel, you stupid, why don't you take a ship from Somalia, go to Dar es Salaam, go to Joburg, go to Kinshasa, Brazzaville, go to Lagos, Nigeria, go around to Casablanca, and then go to Egypt somehow, and then go from Egypt to Sudan to Khartoum. You didn't think about that now, did you? Now, that's the interesting thing about Africa, is how little do we actually, so when you think about, okay, we need infrastructure to connect that continent, people then think, oh, the only way you can do it is actually to take a boat. Actually, a railway connecting Cape Town to Cairo will work very well, because what it will do, it will provide a support to a boat that will probably do that trip around the continent, or it will give you access to the inland countries by actually crisscrossing it east to west. But what it does provide you is that sometimes we are so closed in how we think about solutions to problems that sometimes when you take a step back, you say, but isn't there an easier solution? I mean, if I started with those cities, you would have never thought of them actually in a way possible to connect them in one single move, which you can actually physically do. And it's so easy to actually do that concept. Of course, when you come to Khartoum, it's much more inland in Sudan, but all it shows you that all the countries with the major countries actually can be connected by a ship or by a boat, so to speak. But it talks to the fact that Africa still needs to think creatively about how to connect ourselves, because if we talk about the possibilities that each of these countries offers individually, because remember, while you have one continent, the countries are extremely different. I remember just before 2010, there was an incident in Angola that the Togolese soccer team was ambushed. They decided to go back home, And then the people that needed to come to South Africa to the World Cup suddenly thought they would not come to South Africa because they thought Angola and South Africa were together. These guys speak Portuguese, they don't speak English. They are ruled by a dictator called Dos Santos, actually not ruled by a dictator. So the differences between countries are so stark that unless you appreciate that, you can't actually appreciate what opportunities actually are offered. The other trick, of course, that if you ever find yourself driving from on the N1 around the Limpopo province, the interesting thing is that the biggest trucks that you find are the trucks that are carrying copper sheets from the DRC to Gauteng, which is always interesting. Anybody been on that road lately? You get these convoys of trucks with copper that's loaded to them. So the trick of actually connecting these major cities, if you could move that stuff from Kinshasa, Brazzaville to Joburg, Cape Town via the sea, that might be probably even more environmentally much more friendlier than currently is the case.
Copper belt is in the southern part of the Congo.
So it will be too expensive to move it to the.
Otherwise, you can get it from Lubumbashi to Kinshasa.
Why?
Because there is no infrastructure.
That's the trick. So rephrase the question again, or the comment.
There's an opportunity, but
that's the trick. So I agree with you, but that's the opportunity, and that's the whole story. That the fact that we actually transporting the stuff by road is simply because there is no infrastructure. But actually, that is the opportunity to build the infrastructure. But if you can build that infrastructure, suddenly trade between these African countries become even that much easier, because I can imagine that the biggest expensive thing in terms of moving that goods is purely logistics. Probably cheaper to dig the stuff and much more expensive to move it. Anybody work for the big retailers like ShopRite, Checkers, and Woolworths that have built capabilities in the continent? If not, it's not a big problem. The most interesting thing about the fact that we as South Africans have this push is that a ShopRite, Checkers that has been successful in merchandising in South Africa, the minute they move to Zambia, they have a challenge. You know what the challenge is? They have to stop being a merchandising company and become a logistics company all of a sudden. So in a capability that was very, 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 very instrumental in your success in South Africa becomes less important in how you become successful somewhere else, because the most important thing in becoming successful in the rest of the continent is no longer how good are you at selling stuff. It's how good are you moving it there in the first place. Now the opportunity, of course, is it's located there. Don't move the stuff from South Africa. So why are you moving the stuff from Cape Town to Lusaka? Why don't you create capabilities in Lusaka to actually do the stuff that you are moving in there? Well, if it's South African company, of course, it makes more sense to try and make sure your manufacturing and your storage of the goods happens here, and then transport that is good for the economy of South Africa. But maybe you take a step back and say, well, if I did that in Zambia, of course, it made my merchandise much cheaper, and the company would be more successful. But anyway, the reason I wanted you to think about is that Africa is quite interesting. We, number one, don't think ourselves as South Africans. So when we actually approach how to do business in Africa, we actually normally come up with a mentality, with an image of Africa that is very, very European or American. So what we're trying to think of Africa is that, oh, the distance between Johannesburg and Dar es Salaam is probably, or should be, relatively speaking, be the same as the distance from London to Paris, or from Paris to, give me another name, to Cologne. If not Cologne, to Rome. If not Rome, to parts of Berlin. But the distances involved between these major cities, for instance, relative to the major cities in Europe, is that the distances are extremely vast. So if you're moving goods between those places, you're talking a totally different kind of doing business than the one you would think about if you're actually doing business in a European context. But all of us here, except that man there, actually have European mindsets, actually have American mindsets. So that's how we actually, when we actually look at business on the continent, That's how we approach it. Let's go back to the presentation. That one.
I think there's something else we have to keep in mind. The transport by sea is always cheaper than any other way.
That's the thing. That's the thing. That's why it amazes me that it's like
that's why the United States is a world
yeah,
economy.
Yeah. I think if anybody has read a book, I think James Diamond tries to make that point very, very strongly to say sometimes we try to understand why countries have developed as fast as they have, what drives that development, and he makes the point. Because the one single thing that has made China successful, yes, you might say they're good at copying stuff, which they are very good at copying stuff. And I'll come back to saying why are we not copying, but I'll say that for later. Is that they can move the stuff by water cheaper. The biggest challenge that South African Chinese companies investing in South Africa, mostly in the mining industry, face is not how to dig the stuff. It is not the strike in the platinum belt at all. Guess what it is? Logistics. It's cheap to dig the stuff. It's extremely expensive to move it from the mine to the shore. So to move it from, say, wherever it is to Richards Bay or Cape Town or to Durban, once it's there, they're cheap to move it to China.
But the sea is, it takes much longer. That's the biggest problem. To move stuff from here to Angola, for instance, that takes 3 days by road, 3 weeks by sea.
Why is that?
No, there's huge congestion in the port ships in the port in Angola, so I mean they lie there for weeks.
It's port infrastructure.
Yeah, it is not the distance. It's not the distance. It's not how long it takes to physically move in the water from Cape Town to Angola. That's not the distance. It's the port logistics.
On both ends, by the way.
Yeah, on both ends, South Africa and Angola. But that's the point. And I think it is to actually appreciate what the problem fundamentally is, because again, we sometimes don't understand what it is that causes the challenge that we're facing. It is about how we think about the problems that we're facing into doing the business in the environment that we do it in. So you think, okay, the challenge of Africa is that there's not enough food. That's well, there is enough food. I mean, that's not a challenge. It's how should we move that food. And that's quite interesting. The world's fastest growing economies, and this is the world's fastest growing economies. This is quite interesting. Where are they? I'll give you the answer, so you don't have to think very hard. The most interesting is that in the last kind of 10 years, it is the fact that there is a tip to African countries being the area where the actions that are taking place. If you go back to my statement earlier on, when we talk about Africa rising, that's what that really means. You can see on the graph that actually, yes, I mean, you think about Mozambique. Where is Mozambique? It's growing at 7.7%, but after a long civil war, it's starting from a low base. Congo, growing at 7%, again from a low base, but it's growing. That's the point. And except for 1 or 2 countries, they're all actually, I think it's China and India, of course, and then Vietnam. The rest are all countries on the African continent. So why do we think ourselves as Europeans or Americans and go and seek opportunities there? Spoke about the necessity, so I shouldn't go back there. The other thing, of course, is that when you have a business, what do you really want? Huh? The market. Who said that? There. And where's the market?
So it still needs to grow.
Yes? Does it still need to grow, or is it there?
It's there.
Okay. But you said it needs to grow. Why did you say it needs to grow?
Well, the consumption comes with older people,
Does it?
to a large extent.
Okay. Who controls the cell phone in your house?
My son.
Who controls the TV in yours?
My husband.
Give that man a belt.
It's a man of power. I'm going to ask you this question now, and I hope the answer will be different. Do you have kids?
I do.
Oh, okay. Who informed the kind of TV that you have, that your husband controls?
I want to say my husband.
Okay, I give up. You must be tech savvy.
If my kids were involved, they would have chosen that.
In my house, any appliance is not controlled by me. It's not, and what appliance we buy, it's not between me and my wife. It is what the kids think is the thing to have. So yes, the parents have the cash, but it is the children who actually determine the consumption. And the interesting thing, of course, about Africa is that actually, while we in South Africa think of young people as kind of the people that we depend on, when you go to the rest of the continent, young people are the market, they are the consumers, they are the people that make the decisions. The average age of people in Africa is just about 19, 20, thereabouts. And it's interesting to see how the average age of some of the countries actually is. You look at countries like Uganda, you have the average age is 15 years old. You go there and you don't see old people; they're just not there. And that's a fact. So if you're thinking of what is the market that you must serve to, it's a market of young people. So if you're coming from South Africa with the mentality that the older people are your market, you go to Uganda, you can't sell your goods because your view of what is your target market is actually not fitting the actual market that you're coming across. And I think the misconception of what kind of market Africa presents is one partly part of the reason why most companies that go into Africa actually fail. Because they're thinking we're going to sell to a demographic that's very, very similar to South Africa. And when they get there, it ain't. They don't think the same way. They don't do the same kind of thing that we've been taught to think they actually do. So if you want to go and actually do business in Africa, you need to, in a sense, locate yourself in the continent and understand it for what it is. Not to do what we do, and I'm not saying it's always a bad thing. You go to America and somebody talks to you about Generation X. And suddenly you come to South Africa, the marketing people love the stuff. They just take sorry, the marketing people. they go to the US and they get this concept that are very, very perfect in the US. But what kind of population demographic is the US? Look like me. No hair and gray beards.
The baby boomers.
Yeah.
The baby boomers.
But when you come to Africa, it's not the same, fundamentally. And you come and you try to sell to them. So you go there with your products and the bomb.
You can't sell them a frozen.
No. You can't. So again, the only way you can actually succeed in doing business in Africa, and there is a lot that you can do to succeed, you actually have to locate yourself in the continent and understand it for what it is, not to understand it for what you think it should be, because you've gone out there and been told how things are being done somewhere else. It's got to be, what is Africa? And how do I sell to Africa in the way that actually resonates to the country itself? Then the famous argument that people are not creative. Huh? It's not true. Why do you say it's not true? Because I asked you, who invented the Colossus? You gave me an answer. Well, you didn't know, but he gave you an answer. I asked you, who invented the creepy crawly? I think you knew that. I asked you about some of the most famous creative writers out there. You knew who they were. I asked you a couple of people who create music, beautiful music. course you knew who they were. I asked you about some of the big companies that are very famous, like SAP Miller, and you knew who they were, including MTN, Chocolate Checkers. You can name your favorite company, and we knew who they were. And they're also African, or they are African, and they're doing things out there in the world. I could have taken a step better and asked you, if I say the name Kelly in Australia, do you know who she is? She is a she.
Chief executive of a bank and she grew up in South Africa.
Yes. Yeah. If I say Glencore, who's the CEO of Glencore?
Luxembourg,
Where does he come from?
South Africa.
Who's the boss of PhD Bilton? Cloppers. Well, you can keep on going on like that. Who's Elon Musk?
Tesla.
Anybody like the music of Shania Twain? Who was the producer for Shania Twain? Jason DeLange. Where does he come from? Are we not creative?
That seemed to be South Africa versus the rest of Africa in the context.
Does the name Dangote ring any bells?
No, I'm just listening to all the names that were.
Well, because we are in South Africa and you can relate to them better. But what about Ibrahim? If I make my hands like that, what does that tell you? Who's that? You know, there's a guy who does this one. He's won a race. His name is. But there's another one who does this one. What's his name? Mo Farah. He ran for the UK, by the way, in the Olympics last time. But he's actually not there. He wasn't born there. He was kind of. You're right. We use South African examples because we're much closer to South Africa. But what I'm doing is to give you an indication that Africa has a lot to offer. It's just that, I mean, if I gave you a name of somebody in Uganda that you don't know, you can't relate to the person. So I'm telling people that you can relate to because they're not closer to home. But the truth of the matter, Africa has a lot to offer and already offers quite a lot. Jonathan Butler left South Africa to settle in London, is now sitting in Los Angeles. Give me another one. Because he's homeboy, he comes from money investors. Abdullah Ibrahim, he's everywhere in the world, but South Africa most of the time. He comes to visit once in a while, but he's now a global commodity, he's not a South African commodity. So Africa has, I mean, I'm telling you that I could have spoken about other people. If you talk about music, give me a name of somebody that is interesting. In African Lira? That's South African. He wants something African. Let's think about something more. Salif Keita, for instance. Or Yusondo, Angelique Kidjo. So the reason I give you the South African names is because you can relate to them. Huh? Yusondo, yeah. I mean, there's a whole range of Africa. But the point is, the fact that we don't know at all what Africa is. I mean, we don't know that we even have African. But we actually don't know Africa at all. When was your last vacation? Where? Abidjan?
In Africa.
In Africa. You're lucky. Okay, how many? Let's try this one. How many people's last vacation was in Africa? That's impressive. I'm impressed by that. I'm impressed by that because people forget that because Africa has a lot to offer. I mean, it's amazing that yes. I mean, if I'm in Cape Town, I'll start with Table Mountain and the waterfront and the biospheres of the Western Cape, and of course you can go to the Wild Coast on the one end, go to the Kruger Park and via Umfolozi and go all the way there, or you can go the other way into the West Coast, all the way to a small little place called Lekkerse. Where is that? Makolan. It's a beautiful place to be. But of course, you could think of it this way. You could think about the pyramids. You can think about, give me a name. You can think about the lakes. You can think about the gorillas. You can think about the falls. Every single country has something different to offer. So the ability to actually visit the continent as a vacation it's quite big, but how many of us actually take advantage of that? I think the Europeans know more about Africa than some countries actually know about themselves. Because again, we actually don't relate to the continent at all. And what do we call that in business? Tourism. Now, you might think that's quite small until I tell you that there are two big industries in the Western Cape. The two drivers of the Western Cape economy are tourism and agriculture. Sophisticated as you people are, you depend on farmers. Okay. Now, it all goes about how do you imagine yourself in the continent. Unless you take the time to be in it and spend time to appreciate what it can offer, you don't stand a chance of making it work on the continent. You have some minutes to ask me questions. Or to make comments, by the way, don't only ask me questions.
What's the population of South Africa average in relation to that? I don't know.
24, 25. Yeah. The median age is 24.
24. Okay? Comments, questions?
Yeah, perhaps the issue of the middle market. If Shoprite goes into Africa, like out in the top, and therefore you don't have a dense number of stores, but huge catchment areas are actually small. But the thing is that you are looking for a middle market.
That's the answer.
Still very low.
Comparatively speaking. But what's the secret? So you're right. I think the middle market in South Africa but it's 128 million people. The reason why I showed the big cities is that what do you think what proportion of that number do you think they make?
It's a big proportion of that number. It's an extremely small proportion in the city. And number two, there aren't any statistics to guide you as to where to find them.
Yeah, market research is a big problem when you go into most of the country. So you are right. I think there are issues around data and I've seen a lot of people who have made some significant bad mistakes because they couldn't actually get a sense of what the population that they're actually targeting is. That is true. But I think sometimes, actually, this one was one of the biggest problems that I think companies have. Just to understand that the population out there is fundamentally different. So even if you found them, they don't behave the way you think they want to behave. And that hurts very badly. So yes, the fact that this is a small market is an issue, but I think there's more to it than that. Yes?
I think Africa holds huge possibilities. And that we should encourage our children to invest their skills on the continent.
Yeah. Now, that was going to be my last question. My last question would have been to you. How many of you have studied outside of South Africa? So you haven't gone to Stellenbosch University, but how many of you have studied anywhere else outside of South Africa? Okay, very few. If your child were to say to you, I want to go to study at the business school in Lagos, would you let them? Well, chances are you might not necessarily be the one to make the decision, but how comfortable will you feel with the decision? I asked this question of somebody who runs the business school. We do these things we have these relationships with business schools throughout the whole world, and we offer it as a, I think the students in the MBA are offered an opportunity to go and study somewhere else, other than.
And these students come here, so there's an opportunity.
Yeah, but here is an interesting thing about, because I asked this question, how many of our students choose to go and study in Africa on the exchanges?
Very few.
Not few.
If you go to Africa, you find lots of European and American interns. Those are Africans.
No, it's a problem for the business school. The MBA program does offer people to go to our sister or brother universities on the continent. Nobody wants to. The all want to go to Europe or to Asia or the US. They don't want to go to Africa. So the point that you're making, I think, is quite significant.
Maybe we should have the courage to actually enforce them to do that.
Well, Prof, it starts with my first question. It really starts with my first question. Unfortunately, we do not think of ourselves as part of this continent. Whether we like it or not, I mean, I'm not being nasty to you, it's a fact.
It's not like they're very welcoming when we get there.
Wow. Why?
I'm going to Lagos next week and I'm not looking forward.
No, I mean, I have done a bit of that, so I do appreciate that you do come across that challenge. But why? Have you asked the question?
Isn't the biggest problem in African continent ownership? So everybody takes ownership of what they have, they don't share, and that's the biggest problem that we have. We don't share.
Yes, we don't, but I think I'm trying to get back to this problem. I think South Africans, I mean, for you it's inappropriate. We South Africans, I have actually worked in other parts of the continent, and the biggest challenge that I find is that we South Africans go there to create the homeland of South Africa.
It's got nothing to do with your attitude. It's the issue just to get through customs and immigration, and it's a dirty airport, and it's hot, and it's humid, and it's barbecue, and it's just not pleasant.
Why did you look at them? Never said
Essential, man. You go out of the country, I understand the essential to come in.
I won't win this argument, so I'm going to give up. I won't win that argument.
Can I say something positive?
Yeah.
If you go to the airport and you get out, there's about 100 meters of little canopy where you walk to where the taxis find you. And the foreign exchanges are sitting on that thing, side by side, with stacks of money like this without any security.
Yeah.
Any security.
Yeah. This is not a security issue.
No, I mean, I mean, it is true that things. Lagos.
Just get a visa to go to Nigeria. It takes you a month.
Well, I've been checked out of Nigeria, so I mean I appreciate your experience. So I'm not. But why is that?
It's not like I want to go and steal anything there.
I was like saying this man.
That may be his experience. Last year I've been to Kenya, Nairobi, and I've been traveling around some of the areas, also doing trading facilitation. My experience was a bit different, except for the roads in the city itself. It's it's terrible and so on. But you were able to get around. I'm going to Uganda in July and doing similar work out there as well. The experience was
It's very, very positive. Yeah, I mean, I've had nasty experiences, but not only in Africa. But I've almost been not almost. That's the wrong word. I was locked up in the Ukraine without any contact with the world, in a dark room with just metal everywhere.
You must be reading that.
So if you want the best experience, I can always tell you bad experiences.
We had an incident with the Nigerian government regarding people that we didn't allow into South Africa. So obviously that plays a role. Knee-jerk reaction.
Yes.
Okay.
So, just for yourself and for other guys in the room, what is the cultural clashes that we find when South Africa deals with the rest of Africa? It's sort of like the airport, it's hard. Those are sort of.
No, I mean, you can't do anything. I landed in an airport in a place close to Mongolia in China. I've never been in a place that hot, dry, hot, so scary. So I mean, that's an experience. But I mean, it's a very thing. I think language is not unique. I mean, if you go to China, there's going to be a language problem. If you if you go to most of Europe, there's going to be a language problem. So
Well, we traveled for the business school all across the continent. And yes, Lagos is a problem, but we've never had any problem. In Nairobi, Lusaka, name the country. Really no difficulty. Much easier than in Europe. The last time I was in the UK, it was a huge problem at Heathrow. So really, and the culture is really not so different, and everybody can speak English, unlike some people in Eastern Europe, the East definitely. So we don't experience any difficulty regarding cultural changes. People are like us.
my biggest fear is that we try to recreate ourselves. That I think is the biggest challenge.
Yes.
We try to recreate ourselves. We think South Africa. We go to Kenya, we think the Kenyans must be like us. We go to Uganda, we think the Ugandans must be like us. But we don't go to France and think the French must be like us.
But I know what, I traveled last year on short notice to Senegal, and I'm in the Washington flight lands in the middle of the night, and I was not sure if my visa was approved. It was quite a scary thing. I arrived there like at 1:30, and it was an online visa. I fingerprint, and I made it in and out, and I felt very safe. I felt safer in Dakar and in Nairobi than I felt in Johannesburg. I mean, if you look at the latest Global Financial Times rankings for executive education, the Lagos Business School made it on the top 70 together with its USP, GSB, and BIS. So we don't know, but there are good things happening on this continent.
For me, a bit of an eye-opener. So I was recently in Dar, and the people in Dar actually asked me, "Oh, so you come from South Africa? The crime there is crazy. How do you do
Rob, I just want to take the other side. When Western Europe or the Western countries started getting interested in China, this is a few decades ago, it was the big challenge for young people, ambitious in big corporates, etc., to actually get that sort of opportunity
to go there,
to go to the office, and they had to learn Chinese, and they had to learn a lot of things. So they were investing heavily into being able to operate there. I think we in South Africa are very, very, well, either a bit arrogant or naive or whatever. We're not really willing to invest in this, which includes taking certain precautions, etc. And I think the fact that so few of us here have actually been visiting other African countries, I think that's the big thing for me. At the moment, you don't impress anyone if you say I've been in 20 African countries or something. But it should be. It should be one of the items in our admission form. How many other African countries have you visited, rather than just at the airport on the way to Europe.
When somebody asked me, I think the cultural reasons, I didn't want to go to the extreme of arrogance, but that's actually what it is. It's just, and the only way I phrase it is that we try to make the countries respond to us. But we know the old English adage, when in Rome, you do as the Romans do. You don't go and do that. You don't go to Rome and do as the South Africans do. I've never heard that saying anywhere in the world. But we like to actually go to Rome and expect the Romans to behave like the South Africans, which I think never happens anymore. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it's important.
From the business school, from the various centers and the faculty of management, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen. An informing discussion indeed. We've had the questions now. I think we'll have an opportunity. We have a small business academy, as you know, that was part of the USB's community development and engagement with its stakeholders. So please do interact outside. We hope they were setting up the stalls outside, so have a look and maybe buy a few things. And also it's an opportunity to network. And as I said to you, Amakalendra. So go and enjoy Amakalendra. Thank you.